The new My Hero Academia manga chapter is just insane. A few things we have predicted have come true, and today we have prepared another insanely good analysis, especially about two very important issues that have arisen in this chapter. First, how did All For One manage to regenerate all his injuries, even the ones he suffered in the first fight against All Might many years ago? Even though this shouldn't be possible, that's not how the Super Regeneration quirk works. We can clearly see that his ear is healing. And what does all this have to do with Eri and the quirk destruction drug made by Kai? And secondly, who are these people that fly right at Deku at the end of this chapter? If our theory is correct, then Deku could be in mortal danger. We believe that we have found an extremely logical answer to both questions. Also, only a small percentage of the people who watch our videos are actually subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. Please enjoy this video. Let's go! The new My Hero Academia chapter 357 continues with Endeavor's fight against All For One. Endeavor has obtained a new firearm that allows him to attack with strong firepower. However, All For One was able to protect himself with the help of a quirk that allows him to create a force field. He says that this was really close, and although he had seen it coming, he can't help but remember his first fight against All Might. This once again speaks to what we mentioned in the last chapter review, that by accepting himself, Endeavor may have reached All Might's level. Only with true and pure feelings can he unleash his true strength. Endeavor has always disliked his ability because it has limitations, which is why he could not surpass All Might and therefore tried to create the ultimate quirk. The core of everything bad in Endeavor's life is that he couldn't accept himself. He tried to make his sons into what he himself always wanted to be, instead of becoming a true hero himself. He is no longer limited by his greatest enemy, himself, whom he symbolically destroyed in the last chapter, shortly before he awakened a new power, a firearm. And it should be clear to everyone that Endeavor suddenly had a tremendous increase of power. Just a few seconds ago he was literally dying, unable to get up, and then suddenly he's whooping All For One's ass through land and mountains. Just look what he's doing in this chapter. This man is suddenly on a whole new level. And if All For One hadn't discovered something new that for some reason helped him fully regenerate, which we'll get into more in a moment, Endeavor would have officially become the second person to ever manage to defeat All For One. I'm definitely sure Endeavor is stronger than All Might, at least in the second fight against All For One, maybe not in the prime. Of course, All For One is not in his prime since the first fight against All Might either, but still, the fact that he himself compares his fight with Endeavor to the fight against All Might means that he more or less compared Endeavor to prime All Might. Furthermore, if our suspicions are confirmed and for some reason All For One has managed to regenerate even the injuries he suffered in the first fight against All Might, then All For One will return to his prime in the next chapter, and then we can better compare prime All Might with Endeavor. All For One goes on to say that a wounded hero is the scariest thing there is, and we see a full page showing an angry Endeavor concentrating fire where his right arm should be. He then moves forward at a suddenly high speed because Hawks has sent feathers to propel Endeavor. I know, we need to talk about Hawks real quick, of course. He's alive and well.
You idiot. You're honestly an idiot. I don't know what's wrong with you.
All the blood we saw actually belonged to Endeavor, who protected Hawks, after Hawks tried to sacrifice himself to protect Tokiyami and Jiro. However, Hawks was not hit because Endeavor saved him. Endeavor knew that the remains of the feathers on his back would not have been enough to protect him, so he sacrificed his arm instead. Typical fake death flag. I should have noticed that in this case though, my bad. But anyway, back to Hawks. He continues to use his feathers, and so his wings get thinner and thinner. It's only a matter of time before the few remaining feathers are used up as well. He has already been unable to defend his student with his feathers, indicating that he no longer has enough feathers to defend himself or others against such strong attacks. He has definitely reached a dangerous state. Either way, Hawk's feathers have allowed Endeavor to appear right before the eyes of All For One. Then he forms a huge fist and hits him directly. All For One is knocked to the ground, and the heroes below are confused by the force of the fire, as the plan called for Endeavor to deal with him in mid-air. Hawks asks why he didn't use Prominence Burn, and Endeavor says that All For One focused on defense by activating the force field, and that Prominence Burn is too valuable a resource to use in such a risky way. Hawks is surprised by Endeavor's reasoning and says he's finally cooled down, but Endeavor says he's wrong. He's actually as angry as ever. So he attacks again and manages to break through the force field. Endeavor starts dragging All For One over a long distance across the ground, the mountains, the forest, and everything in their way. We then finally have confirmation that the mask is indeed very important to All For One, and as we expected in our previous reviews, that if he doesn't need the mask to survive, he at least needs it to fight at all. We proved this in the last chapter when we analyzed the second fight of All For One and All Might. All For One could not move without the mask, and this is also the case here. Although All For One does something here and there, he confirms that he can't move properly. At this moment he tries to touch Endeavor to steal his ability, but Endeavor then shoots fire from his eyes before All For One can make contact. Then already another monologue in which Endeavor again talks about his mistakes. Bro, we get it. You are sorry. Okay, we have forgiven you. I swear, if he talks about it one more time, I'm gonna lose it. Then Endeavor finally uses Prominence Burn at full power. Prominence Burn seems to be Endeavor's most powerful technique. He uses the full power of his flames to emit a concentrated jet of heat from his body that vaporizes his target. This explains what happened to All For One. Beef jerky. In fact, we were expecting such a moment and even made a thumbnail for this moment. Well, we thought he would fight against Toya. After the attack, All For One seems to be reduced to ashes. Endeavor confirms that All For One didn't have any regeneration, and even if he hides one, his body is not as resistant as Shigaraki's in the last war. An attack like this was more than enough. He thinks that All For One has finally died. At that moment, Hawks then yells at him to get away from the body immediately. All For One then suddenly starts talking again, asks if the heroes really believe that he went into this fight without making a plan. Always the same mistake. He continues by saying that his body is disposable, so he wanted to use it to test if something specific he thought of would work. This confirms our prediction that his body is useless to him and he can theoretically die without any problem because it's just a body for him, nothing more. He will then continue his life in Shigaraki. And this also confirms our assumption that the fusion will not take place physically, but rather on a mental level, unless of course the fusion can use a dead body for some reason. But it is very unlikely that his body will be used in any way, look at him. Of course that might change if his body is able to fully regenerate, but I think the fusion between Shigaraki and All For One would be able to regenerate anyway, just because of how the regeneration quirk works. This may be a bit confusing right now, but I promise after this video everything will be super understandable for you. All For One does not have the ability to bypass the quirk singularity. This is something that is exclusive to Shigaraki, as he survived a 2-month surgery that altered his body. This is the reason why the fusion takes place in Shigaraki and why All For One talks about his own body as if it were a disposable product. The moment he says this, we see Eri in the panel with what looks like a bullet, and I think it looks quite similar to the quirk destruction drug developed by Shihasai Kai, a Yakuza organization led by Kai Chizaki, also known as Crybaby Overhaul, who was responsible for designing the product himself and using Eri's biological material to make it. So it makes sense why both were shown together in this panel. We just need to understand why this was shown in the context of what All For One said before and after. So let's finish this scene really quickly and then talk about the meaning. All For One continues by saying, "Your own body's on the line, that's what you're doing, right?" As he asks this, an eye and an ear begin to grow out of All For One's ugly, charred body. The reason I believe he can regenerate fully, even heal the injuries he suffered in his first fight against All Might is because of the new ear, since All For One has no ear. Okay, so even if he regenerated without being able to heal his problems with a mask, he will be useless again anyway, so Endeavor will just vaporize him completely in the next attack. As I said, he can't fight without a mask, so the only reason he's so excited to heal himself is if he managed to heal his old injuries and thus be back in his prime. So let's summarize everything important that happened in this scene so that we can try to understand the meaning behind it. Number 1. All For One revealed that he is trying to test something, and the result of this test seems to be the fact that All For One can suddenly regenerate. Even the injuries he suffered from All Might a long time ago. These injuries are the reason he is dependent on the breathing apparatus. Number 2. This test carries the risk of damaging his own body, as he has mentioned this in connection with his injuries. He said that his body is disposable anyway. This fits with what he said at the end of the scene to Endeavor about heroes putting their own bodies at risk, so that means that All For One only had to put his own body on the line to create the regeneration effect. Number 3. For some reason we saw Eri in the bullets with the quirk destruction drug in the context of All For One's dialogue about the test and the resulting regeneration. There's a whole range of possibilities as to what lies behind this last point. But first to the drug itself. This substance is able to damage the genetic mechanisms that make up a person's quirk by damaging the quirk factor. In addition to the drug, a serum has also been developed as an antidote that can reverse the effect of the drug and restore the victim's quirk. The idea of a drug that can destroy one's quirk originally came from Kai, who tried to convince his boss, the former leader of the Shihasai Kai, to allow the boss's granddaughter, who had developed an unusual rewind quirk, to be used as a source of genetic material to create the drug. So the drug is based on the genetic material of the rewind quirk, which makes certain changes to the quirk in a person's body. This will become very important in a moment. After Kai was defeated, the drug was confiscated by the police. However, the League of Villains managed to ambush the police escort that was transporting Kai Chizaki and the suitcase with the drug and confiscate the drug for their own purposes, so that All For One could get their hands on the drug, respectively start various experiments and research with the help of Dr. Garaki. Dr. Garaki is definitely involved because Shigaraki brought the bullets directly to him. This is also something very important that we will mention in the following explanation about the context of the panel with Eri. First of all For One could have been directly referring to Eri and or the quirk destruction drug, in the sense that either the effect of this drug produced by Eri's biological material helped All For One achieve this regeneration by putting himself in danger. In this case, Eri was only used in this panel to show us readers exactly what the bullet was, so Eri herself might not be important at all, but only the quirk destruction drug. Or maybe All For One used the quirk destruction drug to achieve an effect that Eri is capable of, such as turning back the time of a body, and manifested that ability in the form of an artificial quirk that he created with the help of Dr. Garaki. But this is rather unlikely, even if it may come a bit closer to the answer. We know that this drug is based on Eri's genetic material and works only because of her quirk, so it's basically based on the rewind ability. You can't make this drug with other biological material. Eri is indispensable. Dr. Garaki is most likely the leading scientist when it comes to quirks. He knows more than anyone else how to work with bodies that have quirks. He was able to duplicate quirks to create Nomus, and he has even bypassed the quirk singularity, something that was thought to be impossible. So it's not impossible that he was able to analyze the biological material of the quirk destroying drug and extract the ability to rewind and turn it into some kind of artificial quirk, or maybe just some kind of attribute that can then be combined with other abilities or even quirks. But not on a physical level, because the drug only affects the quirks, not the body itself, like in the case of the actual rewind quirk. But none of this answers the question of why he had to put himself in danger in the first place for this to work at all. Perhaps it has something to do with the relationship between the quirk destroying drug and the antidote, so that All For One first had to reach a certain physical state in order to achieve a certain effect based on the antidote of the quirk destroying drug. What I mean by that is that Eri has shown that she can undo the effect of the drug with her ability. And since the antidote is also based on Eri's biological material, the antidote is in a way similar to what Eri did with Mirio when she gave him back his quirk. This only worked because Mirio was in a state where it could have an effect. So if All For One used this drug as a concept to develop his own drug, respectively as a corresponding antidote, he would have to get himself into a physical state where the antidote could show any effect at all. If All For One were to apply the concept of the drug Kai developed to a regeneration quirk instead of rewind, he might be able to develop an antidote similar to the quirk destruction drug antidote. To use it, he would first have to inflict great damage on himself to test whether it really works. Of course, he didn't risk simply hurting himself, because as can be seen from his explanation, he doesn't know if it would really work. Otherwise, he would have tried long ago. However, we must mention here that in this case he could also use the normal regeneration ability to heal himself from the burns, but the point is that he managed to heal his old injuries. This should actually be impossible. So if this is really the case and Horikoshi didn't make a mistake and accidentally draw All For One's ear, then he's not just using a simple super regeneration quirk, because with it he can't just regenerate any kind of injury to his body. He can only heal injuries that occurred after the time he received or activated the quirk. Therefore, All For One has said that it is a pity that he did not receive this ability before his fight against All Might. This means that he should not be able to regenerate his old injuries. However, this is where the rewind attribute of the drug comes into play. As I said, maybe he applied this concept to his regeneration ability and maybe even combined both effects. Remember, this attribute of the drug only affects quirks, not the body. It is possible that Dr. Garaki was able to subtract this rewind attribute from the drug and use it in some way to enhance the effect of the super regeneration ability when it comes to how far it can heal the body, so that it basically rewinds the physical state that All For One had when he got the super regeneration ability for the first time. We need to understand how a quirk works. Quirk is always based on its quirk factor, and quirk factors have certain attributes and rules that make the quirk what it is. With limitations and abilities, one of the rules of the Super Regeneration quirk factor is that it can't regenerate injuries that occurred before the user received the quirk. So the physical state at the moment he received that Super Regeneration quirk was stored in the quirk factor. Perhaps the rewind attribute was then able to rewind All For One's physical memory within the quirk factor of the Super Regeneration quirk to a point before he fought All Might, which will thus allow All For One to fully heal all the injuries he received from All Might. This will then allow him to be back in his prime form in the next chapter, and Endeavor will then have to face the prime All For One just as All Might did back then. I think this is amazing. Endeavor will confront himself with his old struggle. Is he really as strong as All Might? Pretty great idea. I know, a bit very deep and complex thinking, but let me know in the comments what you think about this idea. Let's continue with the last page of the chapter, which is also very important. The focus shifts to the ocean where Deku is currently flying towards the flying UA island. Yoichi, the first One For All user, sends something strange and alerts Deku. At the same moment, however, he notices several people or things coming towards him. End of chapter. So what could this be? To rule out certain possibilities, we must consider the geographical location of the scene. Deku was teleported to Okudo Island, which is located in the Pacific Ocean, 200 kilometers off the coast of mainland Japan. The flying UA is probably hovering over Japan's mainland and not somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. So Deku is heading directly for Japan and not the open sea. And that is a great logical clue that we can use to understand who these people are that are flying towards Deku. This means that these people, or whatever they are, cannot be international villains or heroes, or a country's army or whatever heading towards Japan. We have already seen something like that with Star and Stripe, so it would be possible if Deku wasn't heading directly for Japan. So with that, it's very likely that these people are coming from Japan. And if these are any international people, then they must have already been in Japan for whatever reason. We know that there was this international heroes organization meeting where we have seen that many heroes are willing to travel to Japan. We also know that there are many international villains who are working with All For One, so not necessarily impossible. I say heroes or villains because we have a little dilemma here. Deku's danger sense wasn't activated, so that doesn't point to villains, but Yoichi's facial expression and also his warning to Deku does point to villains. This will be very important in a moment. The important thing now is that these people fly to Deku or maybe to Okuto Island. But there's no reason why anyone would fly to Okuto Island. The island itself is not really the most important place for reinforcements, neither for villains nor for heroes. We have Shigaraki and All For One, both of which are much more important in this war to be defeated or defended, hero or villains. So whoever these people are, they are only there because of Deku. This is not a random meeting. Looks like Deku could be in a very great danger. Based on the reaction of Yoichi, the first use of One For All, we can be sure that this group is not good news. He wouldn't react so strangely and worried if it was a group of heroes, for example. You can literally see the fear written in his eyes. It is something sinister, something strange and dangerous, something that made him let Deku know that he should be careful. But if it's villains targeting Deku, then Deku's danger sense would have been activated immediately and he would have noticed it himself, but he didn't. So it has to be something sinister and evil, but nothing that Deku can sense with his danger sense. That's a pretty strange combination, isn't it? Well, yes, but there are creatures in the world of Boku no Hero Academia that have this attribute that fits perfectly for such a moment. Near high-end Nomus. Not high-ends, only near high-ends. That's important, I will explain why. To do that, we need to take a very brief look at how the danger sense quirk actually works. This ability allows users to detect potential threats in the environment, giving them the ability to react to them quickly, much like a sixth sense. Detecting a threat is described by Izuku as a sharp stabbing sensation in his head, so there's no way he can miss it, especially because it also happens automatically. This quirk is able to detect people's intentions and negative emotions, with enemies' danger sense is triggered by their threatening intentions and malice. If the user is not in danger, for example if his enemies are not really evil and just want to help, the quirk will not be triggered. This is true even for people who are perceived as a threat by the user, such as Himiko Toga, who was able to attack Izuku without danger sense being triggered. This is because she attacked him out of love and not out of pure malice. So basically it all comes down to people's intentions and emotions, but if people have no intentions or emotions, this quirk is useless. For example with robots or near high-end Nomus. Let me explain why. What is a high-end Nomu? This type of Nomu completely surpasses all other type of Nomu. They have stats far beyond the upper class Nomu, have superior strength and have up to 6 quirks. They can even overpower the top pro heroes. We saw this clearly when Endeavor and Hawks fought one of them. Honestly, they almost lost. That one huge scar that runs all over Endeavor's face? Yep, high-end Nomu. This is really bad news. But now comes the important part. The more advanced high-end Nomu all have the ability to think for themselves and keep their original personalities. In this case, Deku's danger sense would have worked immediately. An incomplete form of high-end Nomus are called near high-ends. They are said to possess the same level of strength and speed as the high-end Nomu, but have no intelligence. They simply cannot think for themselves and obey only certain people, as Dr. Shigaraki described them. That's it, they have no emotions, no intent, nothing that could trigger the danger sense of Deku. This of course makes them very weak when it comes to combat intelligence, which is important, but as I said, they are still as strong as real high-end Nomus, and thus stronger than the majority of all pro heroes, but dumb as hell. We definitely know that some of them survived the first war, as we saw a couple of them in the villain's hideout, next to All For One, which indicates that he is obviously the one they obey, probably also Shigaraki, and I think we saw that Toya can control them too, maybe only the seeds can control them since they are somehow connected to All For One. And I think there were 12 high-end Nomus in total, but I'm not entirely sure. One was definitely defeated by Endeavor, the remaining turned into near high-end Nomus, and probably not all of them survived the war. I think one was with Toya, near high-end Nomus whose attacks Deku can't sense with danger sense, and who are all stronger than a pro hero on open water in the middle of the Pacific. This is really bad. Their lack of intelligence would make it even more problematic if they all attack at the same time. That would definitely explain Yoichi's facial expression. If that is the case, I think the second use of One For All will allow Deku to use his quirk. So it is possible that in the next chapter we will finally see the final ability of One For All. At least I hope. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong. I'm doing the best to analyze the situation, but My Hero Academia is often very hard to predict. I hope you enjoyed this My Hero Academia chapter review. If you did, please leave a like. And if you want to see more My Hero Academia content, subscribe to our channel with the notification bell activated so you don't miss any of our new videos. We make weekly My Hero Academia content, theories and reviews, and of course, many other series. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.